It's good to be back. Kuro no Kiseki, the 11th mainline game in the Trails series and the first of the long-awaited Calvard arc. As a channel which started with Trails-specific content, I was heavily looking forward to giving it a go, and 85 hours later I have now completed the game, priming me for the release of Crimson Sin later this year. And because of my adoration for the series, I will be splitting this into 2 videos. This first one will just be going over general aspects about the game in a review-like format. Any mentions I make about the plot will be vague in nature. For example, I'll mention elements like pacing, payoff and structure, but specific moments within said narrative will be reserved for the second video, which will be a spoiler discussion looking deeper at what Kuro offered in the grand scheme of the overarching story. As for the footage I will show in this video, the majority will be limited to the prologue, which makes up roughly the first 3 hours, while some clips will steer into the earlier chapters purely to illustrate an example on the topic of discussion. Now before we begin proper, I'm sure there will be 2 questions that will pop up immediately, which I'll answer now. Initially, how did I play a game that is yet to release in the West? That was thanks to the excellent guys at Zerofield, who as a team of fans have taken it upon themselves once again to provide a spreadsheet overlay to translate the game. There is a tutorial on the Zerofield website which shows you how to set it up with either a capture card or PS Remote Play, which I will provide a link to. As for me, I went for the capture card route, ran the game through OBS Studio software and simply put the overlay on top, which gives you something akin to a subtitled experience. The only concession to this is that it's very much an on-rails experience. Prompts are given by the overlay and you simply follow them. So this is mainly for those who want to play the game now and see how the plot develops, rather than dodging spoilers like bullets in the Matrix. As for the second question, I'm certain it will show up, so again I want to address it immediately. And that question is, can you start the Trail series with Kuro no Kiseki? Now this is difficult for me because I've played the 10 games prior, so trying to put myself in the position of a new player is not so simple. And I'd be lying if I said Kuro doesn't draw on experiences from past games. But I'd say on balance, yes, you can start with Kuro no Kiseki. This is ultimately a soft reset for the series, and I think Falcom wanted Kuro to take on the same role as, say, Cold Steel 1 did. In a bubble, Kuro no Kiseki is still an excellent JRPG with solid fundamentals. It maintains the structural basis of previous introductory Trails games with that slower burn as you explore the land, but being the first game of a new arc, it ultimately wipes the slate clean with a new location, new characters, a new engine, and overhauled combat. I can't deny that if you've played the previous games, then certain events will have more impact, as they always do, but as a standalone adventure, new players can still enjoy what it has to offer without getting lost, plus it might even give them the incentive to go back and play the other games. Like Cold Steel 1, it strikes that balance of being a good point for new players to jump in, while also allowing veterans to get sucked into the interconnected lore once again. So with that out of the way, let's jump into the first point of discussion, that being our new setting for the foreseeable future in the Calvard Republic. I love this place. It's a land that we've heard lots of in the past, but outside of one game, I don't think we've ever actually set foot in this land, so seeing it in all its glory was wonderful. And what's great about Calvard is that it's notably different from anything we've seen before. Liberl, Erebonia, Crossbell all had their own defining features that made their land so compelling, and Calvard is no exception. And this first game in the arc makes damn sure that you see everything it has to offer. And it's not just a new land that we're visiting, but it's also the first full run of Falcom's shiny in-house engine. Since Cold Steel 1, they had been using Sony's Fire engine, which clearly had its limitations, and even though the quality of these games has never been defined by their appearance, Falcom felt that it was time to modernise the aesthetic. Reverie was ultimately the testing ground, with some scenes utilising the new engine, but Kuro was the first time it was used from minute 1 till the end. Now no doubt, many players, especially those who have played the likes of Sky and Crossbell, will have a nostalgic attachment to the older yet charming look, but graphically speaking, this is the best that Trails has ever looked, which is not too surprising. It's still not up there with JRPG contemporaries like, say, a Tales of Arise or Final Fantasy VII Remake, but it's a welcome shift. But most prominently, this new engine allows Trails to be more cinematic than ever before. Falcom were always able to convey heavy-hitting moments through excellent writing, especially in the earlier games, but this engine now gives them another dimension in combination with said writing to push those more impactful scenes. For instance, they can do way more now that character facial expressions are more defined and movements are increasingly fluid. And when you see said scenes, you'll know when the engine is running on all cylinders. It's a good sign of things to come, especially considering this will be the basis for future titles, including the new East game that is also in development. However, this change does come with a downside, at least on my PS4 Slim, and it comes down to performance. The frame rate, while not game-breaking, was erratic, especially during more involved battles. I'll also add that the loading times between scene transitions is a bit jarring. It takes away from the flow of scenes when you've got 5 to 10 seconds of loading in between on frequent occasions. I can't speak for those who have more powerful systems, but I can only go off what I experienced. Hopefully though, this is something that will be fixed in the PS5 version of Kuro, which is due to release in late July, where Falcom have already promised aspects like 4K support and a silky smooth 60 FPS. Moving now to the gameplay, and we'll start with the first aspect that had a seemingly major overhaul from previous titles in the combat. Now, I came out on record on my Reverie video and said that even though I do love the turn-based system that has defined Trails since its inception, I felt it was getting stale and it needed a shake-up of some kind. Cold Steel 4 and especially Reverie demonstrated that the system had been taken to its max and it became increasingly easy to exploit over time. However, that wasn't the only issue, as Falcom pointed out themselves in interviews before Kuro's release. One of their main aims in overhauling the combat was to make it faster. There's a reason why turbo mode exists for pretty much every modern iteration nowadays, and has also been added to ports of older games. To address this issue, Falcom has now split the combat into a field mode and command mode, each with their own independent difficulty setting that the player can choose. Transition to combat is now seamless. You immediately jump into the field mode archetype of combat, which takes on very simple action-based gameplay. You have an attack, a dodge, and a heavy hitting move mapped to the R2 button, with the main aim of stunning the enemy so you can transition to the command mode. And this is the thing, a lot of players were worried that Trails was becoming Ys with this shift in style, but that's not true at all. If anything, this field mode just feels like an extension of the field attacks we had in Cold Steel 3 and 4, the ones that gave you a triple advantage. It's literally the same idea, except if you want to mow through weaker enemies, you can just stick to this mode. However, in the majority, when you stun an enemy, a simple press of the square button will transition you to the command mode, which will feel very similar to series veterans. Arts, crafts, items, this is your turn-based mode, with the main additions being the ability to move around freely instead of expending your turn to do so, directional effects for the crafts, a slight difference on the link attacks from Cold Steel, and shard skills, which we'll talk about a little later. And really, the turn-based style is still king here. I'd say it's an 80-20 split in favour of the command mode, with boss battles straight up requiring the turn-based style, as has been the case since Sky First Chapter. And I think they've done a great job with this. It certainly delivers on the main aim of speeding up combat, while also giving players a bit of diversity in how they tackle the overworld mobs. The only real downside as a concession for maintaining speed is that the result screens are mostly gone, the characters aren't really interacting with each other at the end of a battle, and the S-craft cut-ins are also omitted, but those at least will return in Crimson Sin. A bold move by Falcom, but I think they've hit the nail on the head here. The turn-based fundamentals are still there, but it's been given just a little extra spice for those who were getting tired of the older style. As for customization, that got a little change too, but there's still a degree of familiarity. The new augment modules in the Zypher units are arranged in rows, and depending on the combination of Sepith, you'll get various shard skills. These range from things like passive bonuses when you enter command mode, debuffs to enemies, or even skills that form as an execute on low health enemies. I personally couldn't get too in depth with this as it was beyond my level of Japanese, but it felt decent. Hollow cores are also in this game, which are basically just master cores from Cold Steel, and arch drivers function as your means of arts customization, with individual slots that you can unlock to add your own abilities. Again, rooted in the old, but freshened up a little. And since we're mentioning rooted in the old, I feel that this is a good time to mention the soundtrack, which is pretty much a given, right? It's great. Not really. Many frequent viewers know that I hold Sound Team JDK in the highest regard. They have created some of my favourite songs within gaming, tunes that I listen to on the daily. Kuro's OST is good as a standalone, but for me it's lacking from a Sound Team JDK standpoint. They're somewhat victims of their own success. I can't deny that I was let down by Kuro's OST. Out of maybe 90 tracks, I could count the memorable songs in one hand, and even those were a tier below the likes of Silver Wheel, Sunshine Coastline or Blue Destination. It's without a doubt the weakest part of Kuro for me. I just expected a bit more, and I'm hoping that this will be addressed in the future games. However, this next element is something that Kuro definitely does get right, and that lies with its characters. For the start of the Calvard arc, we are introduced to the Arkwright Solutions office, led by our new protagonist, Van Arkwright. Now, since this is not the spoiler video, I'll keep my discussion brief on Van, but I have a feeling a lot of people will like him. He provides a perspective that we haven't really seen since Kevin from Trails in the Sky the Third, at least in terms of experience. If I were to compare him to anyone though in terms of personality, he's got that kind of Yuri feel to him, who was also one of the Shining Shining Light and Tales of Vesperia. That sort of attitude that you can't help but love, and being one of the older protags we've seen, he gives a unique look as compared to the previous arcs where we're a rookie detective or a junior bracer. I really liked Van, he was great, and I can't wait to see what more he has to offer. And it's not just him, many of the other characters, both part of the Solutions Office and outside of it, are decent themselves. Distinct personality, strong character arcs, though some are admittedly executed better than others. Maybe they'll be expanded further down the line, but what the Solutions Office revives is this feeling of being a team. I've mentioned in the past that even though I love the original Class 7, they never felt like a close-knit group to me. I never really saw their growth together. Cold Steel 3 and Cold Steel 4 definitely got things back on the right track, but Kuro is a level above in my opinion. It reminded me of the SSS once again, dependency on one another, camaraderie, banter, solid exchanges between members that are not just limited to Van himself. It's a great bunch of characters and they maintain that positive feeling throughout most of the game. The only real downside I can think of when referring to the characters comes in something that's not really even tied to the quality of the game. It's more related to the shoestring budget that Falcom operates with, and that is in the voiced lines. The Japanese actors and actresses they got for Kuro were high level. I mean, Van himself was voiced by Daisuke Ono, who has voiced the likes of Jotaro from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. So yeah, nothing to be sneezed at. However, if you want the top bracket stars, you need to pay for them, and combine that with Falcom's lower budget, then there are inevitably some cut corners. For instance, there are moments within scenes where only one character will be speaking and the other will be relegated purely to text, which for the most part is fine. But there are some notable scenes where I feel all characters present had to be speaking, because it really does take away from the tone of what these scenes are attempting to portray at times, which is important because Kuro, at least from a narrative standpoint, is quite heavy in its themes, even by Trails standards. It's not game breaking, but like the loading screens, it's a bit jarring. And I do worry because as the big hitters start to return, as they inevitably will in future games, how much more will the voice acting suffer as a result? But regardless of that, I maintain that the characters in Kuro are one of its best strengths, even if it reintroduced a contentious element from recent games that could have diluted their individual arcs. And what I'm referring to here are the Connect events, which as you may have guessed are the bonding events just renamed. Now I want to make this clear that I'm not against bonding events as a concept. I think they are fine if they're utilised correctly. What I mean by this is that the optional event should reinforce the things that we already know about a character. A good example of this would be a certain scene with Laura in Cold Steel 2. In this particular event, she's having a look at the high class tech, makes a mess of it and gets into a pickle as a result. This is a good optional scene because we knew very early on in the arc that Laura is not good with technology, and this is just a humorous scene that reinforces that trait of her character. A bad optional event is anything that hides plot-specific details or, let's say, important information on a character's backstory. I can think of a very obvious example which exists, funnily enough, in my favourite game within the entirety of Trails. If a character's development, for instance, is hamstrung because it's being reserved for an event that is easily missed, then I'm not on board with that, especially when the series you're choosing to do that in is defined by its in-depth characters and world building. Thankfully, Kuro is mostly fine here. It skirts the line sometimes, but it doesn't overstep the mark. There are only 2 events in my memory that I felt should have been in the main story. The rest were just events that were similar to the aforementioned Laura event from Cold Steel 2, which is good. However, Kuro didn't just bring back older concepts, it also introduced new ones like the alignment system. Throughout the journey, and especially in side quests, Van is able to make choices that affects his alignment, split into Law, Chaos and Grey. Now these choices mainly result in small dialogue changes, but the main effects of alignment will mostly be seen in the later parts of the game, with additional events, for example, that may pop up. The conclusion of Kuro itself is set in stone. It doesn't change the ultimate outcome of the story, but the road you take to get there can shift slightly depending on what alignment you find yourself under. If anything, it adds a degree of replayability if you want to see everything, and it's a decent addition in light of that. I'm just happy that the ending itself though remained concrete. Which rounds us out perfectly on our final point of minor discussion, that being the narrative itself. Now of course I'm not mentioning too much of it here as I'll reserve that for next week's video on the spoiler discussion, but I want to at least give a brief mention to it as story is generally the highlight for me in Trails. In terms of content, pacing, structure, it's strong as it generally always is. If you've played any of the intro games like Zero or Sky First Chapter, the outline of this journey will feel familiar to what you've seen before. Travel around the world, learn about the new factions and concepts, and store it away for the next game where things get more dicey. However, that's not a disservice to this game, as there's always that little morsel at the end of each chapter feeding into that big finale, which didn't disappoint. And that is all I'm gonna say on it for now. In short, this first venture into Calvard provides a good balance between pleasing veterans while also having the potential of bringing new players into the series. Kuro no Kiseki proves that Falcom can still maintain that trail spark that has existed since 2004, boasting solid narrative fundamentals, deep characters, and a meaningful payoff. And even though it's a soft reboot for the series, it's still rooted in the foundation that drew people in initially, but also functions as a much needed refresher to the formula as we go into the final stretch of games.